You know, some weapons don't just win battles. They completely change the definition of war itself. They draw this massive line in the sand of history, separating everything that came before from everything that comes after. Today, we're going to dig into the story of one of those weapons, a forgotten piece of tech from World War II that was, honestly, less of a missile and more of a prophecy. This is the story of the ASM-N2 bat. Okay, so I want you to picture this. It's April 28th, 1945. You're out in the middle of the East China Sea, just vast, empty ocean as far as you can see. About 20 miles out, there's a Japanese convoy just trying to get from A to B. The guys on those ships, they're on edge like always. They're scanning the sky, looking for American planes, watching the water for the wake of a torpedo, but there's nothing. The sky is empty, the sea is calm. The threat they think is one they'll be able to see coming.
And then it happens. Just bam, a huge, violent explosion tears one of the ships apart. But there was no warning. Not a thing. No drone of an airplane engine getting closer, no glint of sunlight off a dive bomber, just silence, and then chaos and fire. Now, for the sailors who survived, this wasn't just an attack. It was impossible. It just defied the very logic of war. I mean, how are you supposed to fight back against an enemy you can't see, you can't hear, and you can't even begin to understand? The confusion on their side was total. And if you look at the Japanese naval records from this time, they are filled with these frantic, almost desperate reports. They're asking, what is hitting us? Some guys thought they were being hit by some kind of bizarre long-range guided torpedo. Others were describing what sounded like a robot aircraft. And get this, some even speculated about death rays. I mean, death rays, that tells you everything. They had absolutely no category for this kind of weapon. It was so far beyond what they knew, it might as well have been alien technology.
Well, the cause of all that terror wasn't a death ray. It was something real and honestly something far more important for the future of warfare. It was an American missile, the ASM-N2, and it had a nickname, the Bat. And it was, quite simply, the world's first ever thinking bomb.
Okay, let's be super clear about why this was such a massive deal. The Germans, yeah, they had radio-controlled bombs, but those still needed a guy in a plane watching the bomb fall and steering it with a joystick, kind of like a primitive video game. The Bat was completely different. It was the first true fire-and-forget weapon. Once that thing was dropped from the plane, it was totally on its own. It used its own brain to make its own decisions. It was the very first weapon in all of human history to hunt and kill with no human in the loop. And the engineering that went into this for 1945 is just staggering. I mean, you've got this nearly 2,000-pound glide bomb, and packed inside is a tiny little radar set that acted as its eyes. And its brain? Its brain was an analog computer, a crazy complex web of vacuum tubes and little motors. This machine, flying totally silent miles away from the plane that dropped it, could spot a ship, figure out a flight path, and steer itself right into the target, all with 1940s tech. It's just incredible. But here's the thing. The real American superpower wasn't just inventing the Bat. It was the fact that they could mass produce it. While other countries were carefully hand-building a few prototypes, American factories were just churning out 3,000 of these incredibly complex thinking bombs. This wasn't just a technology gap. This was a gap in industrial philosophy. America could afford to build thousands of experimental weapons, knowing that, hey, most of them might not even see combat. So with this unbelievable technology and thousands of them ready to go, you'd think the Bat would have this legendary combat record, right? That it would have just decimated the Japanese fleet? Well, the reality is surprisingly different. And this is where the story gets really, really fascinating, because it stops being about just technology and starts being about two completely different ways of looking at the world. 3. That's the number. After all that genius, all that money, all that industrial power, the Bat is officially credited with sinking just 3 vessels, and they were all small patrol ships. By any normal way of measuring success, that number, well, it looks like a total failure, which brings up a pretty interesting question. Was it? I mean, seriously, was this whole thing just a massive waste of time? If we only look at the scoreboard, at the number of ships sunk, then yeah, maybe. But if we stop there, we miss the entire point. The real importance of the Bat isn't measured in sunken ships. It's measured in the idea it brought into the world. And to really get that, we have to look at how Japan was trying to solve the exact same problem.
To really understand the Bat's true impact, you have to look at the other side of the coin, at the answer its enemy came up with. And as you can see, the two approaches just could not be more different. As America was pouring all its resources into taking the human out of the weapon, Japan was going to the absolute opposite, tragic extreme. They turned the human into the weapon, the kamikaze. It's a perfect, devastating contrast. One nation put its faith in technology to remove its soldiers from danger. The other put its faith in human spirit and the ultimate sacrifice.
And this quote from the founder of the kamikaze program, Vice Admiral Onishi, it just says it all. He wasn't stupid. He knew they couldn't compete with American factories and labs, so he decided to fight in a completely different dimension, the spiritual one. This wasn't just a military tactic for him, it was a philosophical declaration. It was his final, desperate bet that human will could somehow triumph over the cold, hard logic of the machine.
Now, in the end, we know which philosophy won the war, but this story of the bat, it doesn't just stop in 1945 with its tiny kill count. In fact, that's where its real story, its legacy, actually begins, because this supposed failure was actually the blueprint for every single conflict that would come after it.
The bat wasn't really just a weapon. It was a proof of concept. Its DNA is inside every smart weapon we have today. You can literally trace its lineage. The lessons they learned from its primitive radar, that directly informed the Sidewinder air-to-air missile. The whole fire and forget idea, that's the core concept behind the Tomahawk cruise missile. And today, when we talk about autonomous AI-powered drones, we are simply watching the ultimate fulfillment of the idea that was born inside that clunky glide bomb back in 1945. So if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. The bat was the moment the very nature of killing in war fundamentally changed. Before the bat, warfare, for all its horror, was still a human thing. It depended on a person's skill, their courage, their training, and ultimately a person making a conscious decision to pull a trigger. The bat automated that decision. For the first time, it made killing a function of sensors and algorithms and vacuum tubes. And this is why a story from almost 80 years ago matters directly to you, right here, right now. Because all the difficult, ethical, philosophical problems we are wrestling with today, in the age of AI warfare, they didn't start with Predator drones or in some lab in Silicon Valley. They started with this forgotten bomb from World War II. I mean, really think about these questions. They were basically asked the second the first bat missile was dropped. When a machine does all the hunting, what's the role of the soldier? When your enemy is just a tiny blip on a radar screen 20 miles away, how does that change the act of killing itself? And of course, the biggest question of all, the one we are debating so fiercely today, if a machine makes a mistake and kills the wrong person, who is actually responsible?
So in the end, the bat missile's combat record is basically just a historical footnote. A trivia question. Its real impact was so much bigger. It wasn't about the 3 small ships it sank. It was about the Pandora's box of automated warfare that it ripped open. It proved that autonomous killing was possible. It was the end of one age of warfare and the absolute beginning of our own.
That bat missile flew into history carrying a lot more than just a 1,000-pound warhead. It carried a question that all these decades later, we still haven't figured out how to answer. When a machine makes the final decision to kill, who is ultimately responsible? That is the complicated, unsettling, and powerful legacy of the world's very first thinking bomb.